Good morning and good afternoon once again. Thank you so much and welcome to this webinar on advancing self-reliance in East Africa, looking at the role of measurement, the key lessons learned, challenges and opportunities. We are so glad that you could join us today. In form of a brief introduction, my name is Patience. I'm coming from the Regional Durable Solutions Secretariat as a Solutions Manager for Kenya, but also covering the regional on research and capacity development. And basically in form of a brief introduction to this webinar and the reason why it is really critical for us to have this discussion today is the fact that as we know, the protracted displacement situation in South Africa is really a key humanitarian and development concern. It's really a regional cross-border issue with strong political dimension, and hence it demands a multi-sector response that goes beyond the existing humanitarian agenda. So it is really critical for us to find better ways to strengthen the resilience of refugees and support them to cope with and recover from shocks such as COVID-19 as we are facing today, and also drought, floods, the locust invasion that we are seeing in East Africa now, and the many disasters and emergencies that displacement affected communities continue to grapple with. As we know, although key commitments have been made at the global level, with regards to the global compact for refugees, the IGAD Nairobi Action Plan and the Kampala Agreement on Self-Reliance, while these commitments have been made at the global and regional level, it still remains critical to be seen how this will be translated in practice at local levels. And in line with that, it's really critical for us to continue to collectively invest in and measure self-reliance processes. And these require really the engagement and coordination of different actors, humanitarian actors, development actors, private sector actors, and engagement of displacement affected communities themselves in finding lasting solutions. So it really continues to be critical to invest in better context understanding and strategies that really work towards achieving durable solutions. And this needs to go beyond the economic potential of refugees really, and to look at also the political, the social and cultural dimensions and the impacts and achievements of self-reliance, to see and to better assess how self-reliance can be realized in practice, and how to address some of the that we continue to see as the right to work in practice, the implications of freedom of movement that refugees continue to face in this region. So what we see is that really, while key progress has been made on the self-reliance agenda, then we still need to continue working together to challenge some of the issues and some of the assumptions that we continue to make, and to really be able to measure collective impact and to use similar indicators. So the webinar today is really going to help us to better analyze what are those indicators that we could look at to help us to support measuring of self-reliance and to ensure mutual accountability between displacement affected communities and operational actors. So just as a brief background to why the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative, together with the Refuge Point and REDS, came together to plan this webinar and this learning platform, is the fact that a key challenge in East Africa remains to be the lack of an evidence base on what amounts to successful self-reliance programming, and what could be adapted, what could be replicated, and what could really be scaled up. And so we have come together to support the improvement of programming and policy dialogue, and to be able to create the space for cross-learning and exchanges. And so this webinar is part of a series of events to launch the Self-Reliance Index, which is the first global tool to measure the progress of refugee households on their path to self-reliance. And more specifically, the webinar will take a deep delve on how to measure self-reliance in different contexts and in different approaches, and to share learning and experience from different contexts across the region. So we will try to answer three main questions in this webinar. So firstly, looking at what is the Self-Reliance Index, and to better unpack the role of the index in measuring progress towards self-reliance. Secondly, looking at what are the lessons learned from organizations that have piloted the Self-Reliance Index, including the key success factors that we can highlight, the challenges and the opportunities, and lastly, to really unpack better what is the role of measurement in different program approaches to self-reliance. So looking at the holistic model, looking at livelihoods and entrepreneurship and the graduation approach. So this provides us with a platform for us to really have honest discussions about the assumptions that we need to challenge and how we need to better challenge our own structures and systems to do better and more together in the search for self-reliance for displacement affected communities. So I would like to stop there and to invite my colleague Sima Sin, who will take us more on the Self-Reliance Index and to really highlight some of the learning on the use of the index to measure self-reliance. In terms of quick housekeeping, you could share your questions or your reflections or key documents that you would like to share with all the participants in the chat. And we will keep a look at the chat and also highlight the questions that you will be raising there in the panel that we will have and the discussions that we will have in the chat. So please feel free to raise those in the chat and we will keep an eye on that. Thank you very much and welcome once again.
Great, thank you so much, Patience. On behalf of the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative and Refuge Point, I'd like to thank REDS for co-hosting this event with us. I'd also like to extend a big welcome to everyone who's joined us today. The Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative is a multi-stakeholder collaboration that promotes opportunities for refugees around the world to become self-reliant and achieve a better quality of life. The initiative was launched and is co-led by Refuge Point and the Women's Refugee Commission. Today's event is part of a series to celebrate the launch of the Self-Reliance Index and to commemorate World Refugee Day. As Patience highlighted, the Self-Reliance Index is the first global tool to measure the progress of refugee households on their paths to self-reliance. This has been a critical missing piece of the global refugee response system. Till now, practitioners, policymakers, funders have all lacked an objective way of knowing whether our programs, services, and aid have added up to improved lives for refugees. We've largely relied on project-specific indicators that only give a narrow piece of a picture of refugees' lives. But we know refugees, like everyone else, do not live their lives in sector-specific silos. There are many interdependent factors that go into improving outcomes for refugee families, such as economic stability, health and nutrition, education, a sense of safety and social connectedness, all the things that all of us are concerned about in our daily lives. The Self-Reliance Index provides a holistic picture of how families are doing and allow us, practitioners, to make educated decisions about program priorities, helping direct limited resources to the most effective self-reliance program strategies and to support more effective collaboration with partner agencies. The index is also significant because now, for the first time, it will help us know what works to help refugees regain control over their finances and their futures. That way, we, as the humanitarian community, can make sure that we're scaling up the most effective evidence-based programs. And especially today, in the middle of a global pandemic, we've all seen the urgent need to strengthen the resilience of refugee communities who remain extremely vulnerable to shocks. This crisis is highlighting just how important it is for our programs to build community networks and connections and to support dignified livelihoods that allow families to save for the future and to cope with crises. We started developing the Self-Reliance Index 3 years ago when our recently convened community of practice came together in Nairobi to build consensus around the concept of self-reliance for refugees and agreed to a definition adapted from UNHCR's Self-Reliance Handbook. This definition highlights both the economic and social needs of refugees and emphasizes sustainability, a component of self-reliance that is especially important today. We also took a look at related frameworks and measurement tools that existed at the time and drew inspiration from some of these. You'll see a number of these up on your screen, such as the Self-Reliance Measurement Tool developed by Refuge Point in Kenya, the Wellbeing and Adjustment Index developed by the Women's Refugee Commission, the Vulnerability Assessment Framework developed by the UN and NGO partners in Jordan, and many others. Over the last 3 years, the Self-Reliance Index has gone through several iterations with input and feedback from refugees, practitioners, and experts around the globe, including from the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative's community of practice, whose logos you see here on the slide. This has been a truly collaborative process of development. Along the way, we've also been advised by leading academic experts who've guided a rigorous data analysis, testing, and revision process to make sure that the tool that we've been building is reliable and valid for global use. We have a learning report that details some of the findings from the testing process over the last couple of years. You can find that report on our website, and we'll also post a link in the chat. Several of our partner organizations, including Asylum Access, the Danish Refugee Council, HIAS, the International Rescue Committee, Mercy Corps, and Refuge Point, have piloted the Self-Reliance Index and have contributed their time and resources towards supporting the development of the tool. The pilot phase allowed for the diverse experiences from Mexico, Ecuador, Kenya, and Jordan to shape the index and to ensure that it speaks to the diversity of refugee experiences. So let's take a quick look at the index itself. It has 4 parts and includes the 12 scored domains that are listed here. These are housing, food, education, healthcare, health status, safety, employment, financial resources, assistance, debt, savings, and social capital. We designed the index with a few key concepts in mind. The first of which is focusing on the essential. While we recognize that there are many things that we want to know about a refugee household situation, we focused in on identifying what it is that we need to know when it comes to self-reliance. We wanted to respect the time of both our clients and staff who are administering the index. As such, the Self-Reliance Index can be used as a standalone tool or as a complement to other tools that a lot of agencies have in their existing M&E toolbox. To maintain the integrity of the tool and of the index itself, it is expected that the SRI, the Self-Reliance Index, will be used in its entirety. It is the score of these 12 domains that tells us how a household is doing in regards to self-reliance. I will note here that there is a lot of interest from implementers of the graduation approach to use the index. And we've been working very closely with the Poverty Alleviation Coalition to design an adaptation of the index, which includes a couple of additional data points such as income, which are particularly relevant for that program. The next principle of the Self-Reliance Index is that it is holistic and accounts for the vulnerabilities and also the strengths and assets of refugee families. You will note that the domains are diverse, covering both economic and social dimensions of a refugee household's life. While many organizations and entities provide sector-specific support and services, this tool tells us how all of these different inputs add up at the household level. In the pilot phase, there were some organizations that integrated the SRI into their livelihoods programs, and others integrated it into their legal aid programs. And we've heard from the experiences of these agencies that the holistic nature of the tool helped bring a complete view of the household, which in turn can help with tailoring interventions, enhancing referrals, and promoting collaboration among service providers. The third principle of the tool is that it is designed to track change over time. The Self-Reliance Index functions as both a frontline assessment that can be used to target clients for services and also to measure the progress of clients towards the achievement of self-reliance over time. We recommend that the tool is administered every 6 months. The index has been designed primarily for use with urban and non-camp-based refugee populations and host communities in countries or regions of first asylum. However, a number of agencies are using the tool and plan to use the tool with camp-based populations. We also know, and we've heard from a lot of you who registered for this webinar through your questions, that there is a lot of interest in using the Self-Reliance Index with IDPs and other displaced populations. We're encouraging partners to reach out to us and to tell us how you plan to use the tool so that we can learn together and consider whether any additional adaptations are needed for specific populations. The Self-Reliance Index, the scoring guidance, and the user guide are available in Arabic, English, French, Spanish, and Swahili. The index is also available on widely used data collection platforms such as Comcare, ODK, and Kobo. All of these products are available for download on our website, and we will place the link in the chat box. Our team is ready to support training and technical assistance for agencies using the index. We have remote training and support that is already underway, along with in-person training that we hope to resume when the situation allows. We're already working with a number of partner NGOs that intend to use the index in East Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. And we're also working with some refugee-led organizations in Uganda and Kenya. We will be working with all agencies using the index to conduct data analysis, to begin building a picture of refugee self-reliance around the world. And we will be sharing what we find through the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative's Global Community of Practice. So if you're interested in participating or using the index or hearing about the experience of others who are using it, please get in touch with us and we'll be happy to invite you to our ongoing Community of Practice calls. For those of you who are interested in learning more about the index, we will be holding a deep dive event next week on the 24th. This event will provide an opportunity to review each component of the index in detail. Registration information is up on our website, and we'll also place a link to that in the chat. So thank you again for joining us today. We really hope that you'll find the Self-Reliance Index to be a useful tool and that you'll join us and our partners to increase global learning and to build evidence on what works to help refugees become self-reliant. Thank you. I'll turn it back to Patience.
Thank you very much for that, Sima, and for the insights. Indeed, as you were mentioning, the different links have been put on the chat box. Please feel free to click on them and to register in case you would like to attend the deep dive on discussion that will take subsequently. For the next session, I'd like to invite my colleague Ord Gali to take us through the panel discussion that we will have, and he will introduce the different speakers that we have today. And again, as a reminder, please feel free to use the chat and to type in your perspective, your experiences, and to share documents as well as raise questions. Welcome, Ord.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. I'm very pleased to introduce you to three panelists that are going to discuss with us on the actual use of the tool. It was a really interesting presentation on the tool itself, and I think now we are all looking forward to hearing more on some of the learning and challenges on the use and how to adapt it to different types of programming. So this session, I will ask one question to each panelist. So one question at a time. You will be delighted to know that contrary to most webinars, there is no PowerPoint. It will be a discussion. And each of the panelists will answer questions, and then I'll do a second round of questions. And I'm also using all the great questions that you shared at registration points. So thanks a lot for them. And then toward the end, I'll ask Simar and Patience, who will be moderating the chat, to also raise questions that are coming from the chat, or additional questions also that we had from your registration. So let me first introduce you to Paul Karanja. So Paul Karanja is a coordinator of the Urban Refugee Protection Program at Refugee Point here in Kenya, and he coordinates the delivery of the intervention to boost protection for urban refugees. He has worked, having worked in other organizations before in similar capacity, he honors the role of other actors, including those who program toward achieving sustainable solutions. A very warm welcome, Paul. And Paul will focus on what Refugee Point I learned in piloting the Self-Reliance Index and how they are measuring impact. Then we will have John. John is the M&E manager based in Kampala for Village Enterprise and is leading the monitoring and evaluation field team of Village Enterprise there. He's an ardent advocate for socio-economic equity and a member of the Mandela Washington Fellowship. Very warm welcome, John. And John will talk to us about the graduation approach and what we have learned in implementing and measuring the graduation model and how it relates to self-reliance for refugees, as Simar touched upon very briefly in a remark. And then last but not least, we have Victor Otsimi from the International Rescue Committee, East Africa Regional Office. And Victor is the senior M&E officer, and he managed IRC Livelihood Urban Programming in Nairobi. Been working there for the past 3 years. And Victor will share with us his learning and challenges from a livelihood and entrepreneurship approach, and how he's been using actually the Self-Reliance Index in his livelihood urban program in Kenya. So a very warm welcome to all of you. And let me start by asking you, Paul, a first question. From the experience of Refugee Point in Kenya, you have provided a programming model on how to support refugee basic needs while at the same time investing in their ability to start their lives. So could you tell us more about your approach? I mean, what has been the main lessons learned and challenges, and what role has measurement played in your programming? Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Odd. And hello, everyone. Yes, at Refugee Point, we do run a program here in Nairobi, and it is a self-reliance program. So the program is holistic, actually, even from the word go in terms of targeting, because we do work with community workers. These are refugee staffers, and they help us to carry out the assessments to determine who gets into the program. And after we identify the most vulnerable households, then we provide them with services, different services, to stabilize them. This can include things like assistance with food, rent support, non-food items, counseling, and healthcare. Then we, at the same time, at a point, and of course we use measurements throughout to determine the levels of each household, then we are able to empower them. Once they are stabilized, we empower them with business development skills training and grants so that they are able to either start off businesses or expand existing businesses. And over time, they can use the incomes from these income generating activities to be able to support themselves. Of course, we also, beyond the empowerment, we also link refugees with the public health services, because as we all can appreciate, no one agency can provide everything to different persons. So we do link up with the refugees. We link them up with the other services, like access to health through the government structures, access to education. So there are lots of linkages. At the same time, we do support refugee families where there are children to access basic schooling. And for us, the argument is that once a child is in school, it means the caregiver, the parent or the caregiver, has more time to be able to engage in an income generating activity. So I think that's why we consider the program to be quite holistic, because it looks at different aspects of refugee. Of course, for us, as you asked, Odd, measurement is very key, because this is what we use to determine who gets into the program. And at the same time, we use it for monitoring the progress made by households in their journey towards self-reliance. At some point, we also get scores to determine at what point we will be able to exit a household from core services or all that support that I have explained. And over time, maybe to conclude on this, over time, when we have cumulative data collected, one can analyze this data and you can be able to look at the program effectiveness. So while the approach might sound like it's very much household-based, over time with the collection of data over time, then that can be analyzed, and collectively we can look at the program effectiveness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Very, very interesting remarks. And I'll come back to you in the second round of questions around the scoring and the exit strategy and the impact. But for now, let me move to John. And John, I think would be really interesting to hear from you based on the experience of Village Enterprise as a member of the Poverty Alleviation Coalition, which has a lot of experience in using the graduation approach in East Africa. If you could tell us more about the graduation model itself, how it works, the strengths, the challenges in our region, and also more specifically, how does it relate to self-reliance for refugees? And Simar mentioned a few points, a few remarks on that, on the link between the Poverty Alleviation Coalition and the Self-Reliance Index. But I think we really look forward to hearing from you more on the graduation model and its support to self-reliance. The floor is yours, John.
So let me begin by providing maybe a brief idea of what graduation means. So basically, a graduation is like a combination of interventions that are aimed at addressing multiple challenges of poverty at the same time. And so for us at Village Enterprise, we implement a one-year group-based graduation program, which is composed of 5 core components. The first one being targeting. This is basically a process by which we identify eligible program participants. The second component is trainings, which are basically centered around financial literacy and micro-enterprise development. And then the third component is what we call the business savings groups, which are each composed of 30 households, where they save weekly to create a pool of financial resources where they will be able to borrow to grow their businesses once they start their businesses. Also, we use the savings groups as our platform where we deliver the trainings. And also, quite importantly, it is our exit strategy as a program. So the fourth component is the seed capital. These are basically the cash grants that we provide to the participants who complete the trainings for them to be able to start small businesses. And then the fifth component is mentoring, where dedicated staff continue providing support to the business owner as they are running their businesses for a period of around 9 months before we exit. And so briefly, that's the Village Enterprise graduation approach. And so over the last 20 years, since Village Enterprise focused its operations in East Africa, we have adapted this approach to foster socioeconomic inclusion and self-reliance in different contexts, including the youth, conservation, and refugees. So in regard to the key strength of the graduation approach, as my colleague Paul put it, it is actually also centered around its holistic nature. So you realize that the holistic approach is such that it doesn't just provide relief, but it also goes ahead to address multiple other gaps. For example, liquidity gaps, knowledge gaps, savings gaps, to mention but a few. Moreover, with our approach as Village Enterprise, we also don't work solely with only refugees. We also work with the host communities, because for us it is important that we strengthen the relationships between the host communities and refugees to help promote, integration of the refugees and of course their self-reliance. So the key challenges that I would mention that we've seen with our approach to graduation include: one, illiteracy. So quite a majority of the people that we work with, our program participants, are people with little to no education. And so it gets challenging to them, especially when it comes to aspects like record keeping, which we know is very, very critical for us to be able to assess how they are progressing with their businesses. So that's really a major challenge. The other one, particularly in the refugee settings, there are multiple actors. And so logistically, it gets more complicated as you try to navigate around to understand, other programs that other actors are offering, and of course ensuring that you are not interfering with the engagement of your program participants with those other programs. And then the other one is high mobility of the refugees, for example. So once they have started their businesses, most of them became mobile. They move from one place to another to look for markets for their merchandise. And so aspects, for example, like mentoring become challenging because they are not available all the time. And then finally, but not least, we also realized that some of our standard processes and tools were unfit for the refugee context. For example, our targeting process, where normally we conduct a spatial wealth ranking exercises, followed by collection of the poverty probability index surveys. So we found that irrelevant in the refugee settings. And so we have to think around very fast and rapidly come up with new and appropriate tools for that purpose. And that's why, as Village Enterprise, we're actually excited about the prospect of using the Self-Reliance Index tool for this targeting purpose. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Very interesting point, and we'll come back to you to elaborate also on the link between the graduation approach as the poverty reduction tool versus the self-reliance and the use in refugee context, and how the two really complement each other and work together. Thank you so much, John. And now, Victor. So, Victor, it would be really nice if you could elaborate on how, based on the use of IRC of the Self-Reliance Index into his refugee livelihood urban program in Kenya, it would be great if you could share with us some thoughts about your practical experience and the key lessons learned of using the tool, the Self-Reliance Index, in your own programming. Thank you, John. Victor.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity given. And I'd like to, today I'm representing IRC on the Self-Reliance Index, and I'll focus more on the adoption of Self-Reliance Index in urban context, whereby here in Nairobi, we have been using it in our livelihood programming. So the program itself that IRC is conducting in Nairobi is geared towards increasing refugees' employability skills, and then also micro-enterprise skills development. So you realize from a research that was done by UN, these are lacking skills because most refugees are unable to secure white-collar jobs. I know in most urban places, because of a number of issues, work permit being one of them. So for IRC, we designed this program to ensure refugees are able to gain these skills, and they're able to achieve self-sufficiency, and they're able to be self-reliant later on in future so that they can depend on themselves. So in the program, we adopted the tool, and you'll realize in the program, we have 4 main objectives that we like to achieve. So we take them through vocational skills training, whereby the refugee skills are developed through attending maybe a vocational course. Like, for example, if I want to do hairdressing or even catering. From there, I'll be able to secure that job because we have follow-up surveys that we do and other additional support that we offer them to ensure they're able to get this assistance. Also, we have adult literacy and numeracy training. You realize here in Kenya, English and Kiswahili are the basic languages, and we have refugees who are coming in and they can't communicate. So we took it as an opportunity to again take them to school. They're trained on basic literacy and numeracy, and from there they're able to communicate and even do their own business and some little mathematics here and there on calculations on how to read, how to give back change and a number of issues. Also, and additionally, we realized we have refugees who schooled, they are graduates, some have certificates, but again, they lack on-job skills, let's say in urban context. So we offer apprenticeship training again to them to ensure they go and do on-job training. From there, they are able now to apply for a job elsewhere, and hopefully, based on the data that we have gathered, some are getting employment, and that is a big success. The other one is on micro-enterprise skills development. We take them through basic business management skills. They have to attend learn-to-earn training. From there, we give them funds to start their businesses and even to grow it further to ensure they become self-dependent. And we have achieved a lot of success with that. And finally, IRC has adopted an experience-based program whereby clients, refugees in particular, now they are able to host. They are able to be in Airbnb platform, host, and earn additional income. And this one has really done us great by ensuring they can go an extra mile and do something different for themselves. So those are the 4 areas that we are focusing on, and we are doing in Nairobi and its outskirts, including Kajiado County. So some key lessons that we have learned since we piloted it also. You realize refugees are very vulnerable. Because the program, we have 60% refugees and 40% Kenyans. There are those Kenyans that we again also administered the questions to them, but you realize the level of vulnerability of refugees compared to Kenyans is way different, because refugees are unable to have even the social capital needed. They can't form groups. They lack the maybe the startup capital for them to be able to save. And we learned even education-wise. We have a free education to all Kenyans here. And refugees, I know they're really struggling also. So you realize because they are not in their native country, they have a lot of challenges once they are in a different country. And from the tool, we have learned a lot about the refugees. Okay, I know I'll talk more about the lessons, and for now I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Victor. You indeed answer very extensively on both questions. So thank you so much. So let me go back to you, Paul, and building on what you explained to us initially on the approach and the role of measurement. I think it would be really interesting for us to hear, based on the use of the index itself, how has the tool actually impacted your program, and what challenges can users of the tool anticipate? If you could share with us some key points from your own experience.
Thanks again, Odd. I hope I'm audible enough. Yes, thank you. So as we all know, actually in our setting here, the demand for services far way outstrips the available resources. And so the SRI is, as we noticed, is actually a very useful tool to help us in targeting. Because when we have a commitment to work with the most vulnerable refugees, we also appreciate that, refugees in general, walk along with different vulnerabilities. So the tool is very useful in terms of, targeting the most vulnerable. Then we can be able to work with them. And then also from the scores that we get, we realize that they've become very useful for the case managers to be able to prioritize interventions. Because where there is probably a low score, that is an indicator of an issue the household is struggling with. And so as the case manager, writes their case plan, they will be able to focus on those areas where the scores were low. And of course, we've also realized that the tool, while we have had other tools in the past, the SRI has several domains. Actually, it has several other domains that we have not been measuring in the past. And during the pilot, we realized that we are getting insights on how we can work around some of those additional domains or areas that are being identified by the tool. In terms of challenges, what one can anticipate, I probably would want to talk about the whole issue of data collection itself. And on this, I would say that the SRI, the scoring is based on the responses we get from our respondents. And so there, while one would also observe, but much more we do the scoring based on the responses we get from clients. That means that the interviewer needs to be very much ready. They need to engage the right interviewing techniques, like creating empathy and all that, and explaining what they are about to do and the purpose of the tool and all that, because you want to get the most credible responses from your respondent. And then, of course, there could be other challenges like, cultural factors. I mean, we've gone to households where maybe the wife believes that it's only the husband who should respond to questions. It's only the husband who knows the answers to the different questions. And maybe then they also say that the husband is not there. So those things do happen. And one has to decide who else in the household can I really get these responses from. I think as one of the next steps in terms of thinking for all of us, it is how to calibrate the scores in regards to our contexts. And I think for the user, anyone who would want to use the SRI, they probably would have to think about the calibration of their scores, in line with their local context. We've also noticed that the tool can help one identify diverse needs. Some of them may not even be covered by their programs. And as a result, one would have to think beforehand, what do you do with the information that you will gather beyond the scope of the program? Might one need to do referrals? Might one need to recalibrate their programming? And all that, what might it mean if you gather more data than can be absorbed by the program? Thank you, Odd.
Thank you very much, Paul. And again, some really interesting insight. I'm taking notes around the need to calibrate on the context, but also how to work together. And I think back to some of the point that Patience and Sina raised at the beginning around the need to work with multiple stakeholders on the self-reliance and having different actors contributing to it and putting in place referral mechanism, which I believe, John, you also touched upon in your intervention. So building on all insight, John, could you tell us more concretely about how you have approached, how you are actually measuring your graduation program? How concretely do you so? And how do you see a tool like the Self-Reliance Index complementing or advancing this work? You touched upon a little bit in your first answer, but it would be great if you could really be much more specific on how you're measuring the impact of the graduation model and how does that relate? How could the index support in some of the dimensions that you mentioned earlier on?
Okay, thank you once more. So when it comes to impact measurement at Village Enterprise, we have a twofold approach. So we have robust internal monitoring and evaluation systems that allow us to track key indicators. For example, primary household level indicators like changes in asset value, changes in savings, changes in income proxied by consumption and expenditure, and others. And also some secondary some secondary indicators like health and schooling. But when it comes to attribution of these changes over time, we have in the past completed a randomized trial, and currently we have another going on. And for our programming with refugees that we are planning, we also plan to conduct a rigorous impact evaluation to be able to help us understand the impact of our approach specifically for the refugees. And so that also, to us, we envisage that to provide us with an evidence base that allows us to adapt our program to work better for refugees, but also to inform the discussions with stakeholders, including policymakers, both local and internationally, especially to see how to effect some systemic level changes. So in terms of how we envisage to use this tool, the SRI, we see some overlaps already with what we collect. So like looking at things to do with like health, education, things to do with like maybe food security. However, there are a few things that I did see that the tool not capturing. That includes actually income. So maybe if an adaptation can be made to the tool to enable us to be able also to assess, household income, that would be powerful, really. But for routine tracking, I think the tool has a number of elements that we can routinely track. So we expect actually to integrate the tool with our baseline and airline surveys, or collect it as frequently as recommended by the guidance. So that's how we anticipate to use this tool as part of a monitoring and evaluation toolbox at Village Enterprise.
Thank you so much, John. And building on this question, maybe a question more related to Sima, but maybe Paul as well, or Victor. But let's start with Sima. How could you help us to understand the cost implications? That came out quite a few times for participants that registered. What are the financial and human resources needed to be able to implement the SRI, and what do we need to think of? Maybe Sima, and then Odile can build on that.
Yeah, thank you, Aude. It's a great question, and it's one that we're very interested in as we work with more and more agencies who are planning to use the tool. I would say, I think based on our experience during the pilot, it really depends on the existing infrastructure for different partners. So for some agencies, such as Refuge Point, and I'll let Paul speak to that. For some agencies that are planning to use the tool as their exclusive or their primary measurement tool, it is possible to sort of use that within existing resources. There's already capacity, and this is sort of going to be the main tool. For other organizations, especially larger organizations that are working with many different types of populations, providing many different types of services in different contexts, it's likely that this will be one of several tools that they are using. And so particularly given that it is a new tool that a lot of agencies will be adding to their toolbox, and if they are planning to measure it with the frequency that we recommend, which is every 6 months, it likely will take additional assessors, so additional human resources to implement it. And then on the back end, I think it sort of depends on how the results are taken and fed into programming. We are working with a number of partners to see how they can integrate the tool into their existing monitoring systems, and to really answer the question that you asked, which is, what additional, if any, resources might it take? So maybe not a very satisfying answer, which is it depends, but I'll leave it at that and see if Paul, maybe you want to speak from your experience.
Yes, so as Mar pointed out, some of the cost lines that would go with the usage of the tool, I think she mentioned the staffing. Like during our pilot, we had a dedicated staff member who was going around and collecting the data. In some settings, you might also need a translator. Well, we appreciate that the SRI is already in different languages. For sure, once you're planning to go out and meet the different households, one would have to consider the issue of translation, if of course the language of the interviewer is not the language spoken by the respondents. The other cost lines would have to do with the gadgets. I think the tool is in CompCare and different other platforms. So basically it's like an online data collection tool. So a tablet there, a smartphone would be important. So that's another cost line. And maybe finally administrative, sort of support, which would include, transport to the person who is going around and all that. Let me stop it at that. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Paul. And Victor, another question to you, and more specifically, and I'm sure also Paul will have also some ideas, but a question that came back a lot was also, how do you actually address the legal barriers to self-reliance, and how does the tool kind of, not help you directly with that, but how do you address the access to work? And patients mentioned a few of these challenges and barriers when we're starting the discussion. So could you tell us a little bit from that perspective, maybe Paul or Victor, on concretely into your program, Victor, in Kenya, when we knew the legal barriers for refugee? How do you work around that in practice?
Okay, thank you again for the question. I like to say in our program, initially, some of the indicators that are there for the self-reliance in some of the domains were already in our client selection tool, which is the registration form that we use to register our clients into the program. So it is a tool that we have developed into CompCare because it is able to do a case management. And later on, we are able to follow up with the clients and get feedback on how well they are doing later on. So initially, we had a vulnerability scoring in our system, and we also learned some of the domains that are there in Self-Reliance Index were missing. So we added the domains, but for others still, because we already had them, we could add the responses together and get the scoring. So we are able to get the vulnerability at the end of the day because it is a program whereby we want only the vulnerable to qualify. And because of this, we have a cutoff score. So it enables us to also streamline or contribute also into that because it was just additional to already what we had. Some of the challenges that we noted, as Paul has alluded, you realize the refugees live in a community and they share information. So you realize when you go to, let's say, one household and you administer the tool, later on when you come to the second household, assume it is another day, they will have already shared information. And in as much as possible, they would like to qualify and show how vulnerable they are, even if maybe someone is not vulnerable. So I think those are the challenges because information sharing is out there. They share information a lot. And yeah, so it is one area that you realize, let's say when you want to go to a household, you realize already, maybe they are already prepared. They know some of the questions because they again live in the same community and they share information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. And thanks a lot to all of you for sharing with us very useful insight and your own practice and learning. And maybe to transition to the conclusion of this brief panel to give a flavor of the tool, I think it'd be really useful to hear maybe from Simar and Paul on, and that was a question on the chat, but it was also a question that came quite a lot from the registration. How do we plan to use the tool in non-urban context and in camp settings or other type of settings, and also to not necessarily only to refugees? So maybe if you could elaborate on that, would be really useful, a bit of kind of the next steps and how do we plan, and we know we've been trying to test the tool in non-urban context, so it'd be really great. Maybe Simar and then Paul to elaborate, and that also John, I'm sure you have to complement from the graduation. So if you could that as your wrapping point, that would be really great. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Aude. Yes, that's a really great question. So the tool, as I mentioned earlier, was designed mostly for use with in urban settings. And we found even during the pilot phase that some of our partners ended up using it not only with urban refugees, but also with host communities in those areas. And we found through that process that the tool as it stands worked quite well in use with host communities. I think, you know, sort of the understanding or the way in which you're asking the questions and sort of understanding the response changes a little bit based on the context. But I don't think there were any sort of adaptations that were required. If anything, the adaptations that may be required are in the first section of the tool when we're collecting biographic data, just to make sure that all of those questions are relevant. In terms of camp-based populations, we haven't tested the tool there during the pilot phase and run all of our analyses. So that's sort of the big disclaimer we give. But we have been thinking quite a bit about this. And we have partners at the moment who are about to start using the index in camp-based settings. So that is something that we are keeping a close eye on, particularly to see if from their experience doing so, there are any challenges with the way the questions are sort of phrased in the different domains, or again, with the biographic information. Based on our initial discussions, we don't see or anticipate that there will be any big shifts that are needed for camp-based populations. I think when it comes to IDPs and other displaced populations, we've received some interest from agencies, resettlement agencies in the US and in other countries who are also thinking about using the tool with their populations. So I think as I mentioned earlier, we're very open to partners sort of taking this and running with it and letting us know how it goes. I think, you know, we are very interested in ongoing learning around the tool. We have an entire learning community, the community of practice, that is very engaged in this. And so we're open to hearing different people's experiences. And then we do definitely want to share any lessons that are coming out from using the tool with different types of displaced populations widely, so that others who are, you know, maybe on the fence and want to hear about the experience from others are able to benefit from that. But I'll turn it over to Paul, who can share some of Refuge Point's experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Sima. Well, our Nairobi program supports refugees and vulnerable Kenyans. So we included a few Kenyans in the pilot phase for the SRI. And I think as Simar correctly pointed out, we actually did see any need to adjust the way the tool was presented, simply because we are dealing with the host community. For instance, the question on shelter and trying to establish if the family has been able to pay up their rent arrears and all that. we didn't need to adjust that question, because we were asking a Kenyan and not a refugee. And other questions like the issue of debt. The tool is establishing, do you have debt? And of course, if you need something like a loan, are you able to access that? The way that question is presented to a refugee is the way it is also presented to a local. And as Sima said, I think we have a broad interest to see the tool being tried out in different settings, with IDPs in different camps, and we can see if there would be need to iterate the tool in a different way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul and Sima. John, you want to add?
Yes. So when I received the invitation, plus links to the materials of the tool, I quickly went to see what the tool is all about. And then I was also reading it was actually designed for urban settings, refugee settings. But when I looked at like the content, I saw like, okay, I think over 90% of this is actually applicable even in camp-based settings, where solely our experience has been. And so for me, I was looking at an opportunity perhaps like to touch base with the team that designed the tool, if there are any assumptions that need to be tested in the camp-based settings, so that we can see how to adapt the tool if any adaptations are needed. But overall, I saw, as I said, as I mentioned earlier, there were quite a number of things that were cross-cutting with already the tools that we use. And so we're seeing actually minor adaptations to that tool if we're ever going to make any adaptations. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much for the insight. And I think one point that we didn't have time to touch upon because we are coming toward the end, but there is also a build on some of the points that were mentioned. The index also had this legal component, and there is a close correlation also with the policy discussion and the policy environment, and how to also address what Victor was talking about, answering on the legal barriers and some of this dimension as well. So I think one of the final points that I wanted to raise that was coming from the question is that there was a lot of demand to create, maybe Sima and Paul, this committee of practice at the regional level in East Africa. There was a lot of question on the REDS country specific, but maybe, I mean, that's a good transition to hand over to you, Patience, on the way forward, and what can we expect as a support from us as a group to the participants that attended today, and maybe would be interesting to take forward and to try it out, but also how can we continue the discussion beyond this webinar? And there is kind of two groups today, but in general, we have the kind of LME and the people that will have a lot of questions on the tools itself and the indicators, the composite indicators, etc. And then we have a lot of questions that are very programmatic. So today we really focus on the measuring and the how, but there are also a lot of discussion on the concrete use within the program and how to use the measuring and the data coming to inform better programming. So that also will be some of the insights for the next steps and in terms of next discussion. So I would like to very thank all the panel for the very interesting discussions and for your insight. And I hand the floor now to you, Patience, from some final remarks, takeaway, and next steps.
Thank you very much for that. And basically, so in terms of next steps, we will share the links once again and the presentation that Sima made in the beginning, because a few of the participants were asking about that earlier. So we will put together a package with key resources as well as the presentations that have been made today and the key takeaways from this discussion. So just to briefly take you through the key issues that have come out of this discussion and that will inform the next steps is that really the fact that the SRI was designed to fill a critical gap in refugee response around the world. And hence, it's really an objective way to measure whether the programs being implemented are effective and in helping refugees support themselves and their families. So while we see that the tool has not necessarily been tested in the camp settings, there are plans to test that. and we will continue to address, to keep you informed on the outcomes of that. Just to mention also, coming out from the discussions, that the tool can be used with different types of self-reliance programming approaches. And as we have seen from the graduation approach, more holistic approaches, looking at livelihoods and entrepreneurship approaches. And it's really critical, to have context analysis and understanding of the strategy towards self-reliance that will need to go beyond economic potential and look at the social and cultural dimensions that impact achievement of self-reliance, so as to focus on also addressing some of the barriers and to remove some of the administrative challenges that refugees continue to face. So again, coming out of the key discussions that we have had is that different program approaches would require for us to have common or collective indicators. So the development of self-reliance indicators is critical to help to track the global progress and to compare outcomes between different locations and to identify the most effective programs, as well as diminish duplication of effort. And the thing that is really the fact that different approaches are being used to address self-reliance, and so having common outcomes and collective outcomes that can be agreed upon a wider range of different actors would be really critical, and to help to direct the limited resources to the most effective self-reliance program approaches. So this tool, as we have seen, again, can be used to understand targeting and critical to inform program interventions and prioritization. So to better understand what are some of the domains that are usually missing when we address self-reliance. And that will again mean a multi-sectoral kind of approach, because not one program is able to respond to all the aspects of self-reliance, and therefore agreeing on these collective outcomes is really going to be critical for us going forward. As has been raised by different participants, and as Odd mentioned earlier, I think what would be really critical is to have this community of practice. And so the Self-Reliance Initiative and REDS, together with other key actors in East Africa, will look at next steps on how to set up this community of practice and to continue critical discussions on programming and policy towards achievement of self-reliance. Again, there will be trainings that will be planned on the use of the tool, the use of the index. And so we will keep you posted on upcoming trainings and upcoming other events that will be held on specifically on the use of the training. So with that, I'd like to stop there and to thank you once again for participating in this webinar. And indeed, as mentioned earlier, we will share all the key resources and upcoming events that will be coming after this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of you. Thanks to all the panelists, and have a nice afternoon, everybody.